Well, thank you, Alison, for agreeing to take part in the interview. My first question really to you is, how would you define executive function?
Um, I would say that executive function is closely associated with central cognitive function. Um, I found a really good definition recently in a book on adult autism assessments by Hartman and others. So the definition I would give is that executive function relates to internal control processes such as planning, transitioning, sustained attention, focus, and memory. And these processes then enable bodily, cognitive, and emotional self control. Um, I think that's actually the best definition I've come across.
I liked the one you used in your book about Thomas Brown and the orchestra.
Oh, yes. An orchestra without a
That
conductor.
one, yeah, I thought
Um,
that was really good. That sort of really sort of summed it up for me quite well. I got that image quite clearly in my head.
well, I think it's funny when I was diagnosed as having executive function issues. She gave me a handout, the neuropsychologist, and it had a picture of the orchestra without a conductor, and it actually yeah, it did have resonance for me because it actually puts it in a nutshell, really,
Mm,
how it can impact on you.
Yeah, I thought it was a really, I'd not come across that before. That's excellent. Um, what is the impact of executive functioning difficulties on a student?
I think the impacts, it's quite a long list, but I'm going to run through this quickish. So it can affect memory, working memory, and that's having an impact on revision and retaining new learning. It has an impact on attention and concentration. So that's going to impact in the classroom and when studying independently. Causes procrastination as well. There's an impact on time management. So being late for things and missing things completely, missing deadlines. Um, Flexibility, it can have an impact on flexibility. So it can be difficult to change plans or change perspective without stress. It can have an impact on planning. So that would be problem solving and decision making. For example, choosing an essay question or an option. It could be hard to decide what choice to make. It can have also an impact on emotional life. So moods can be more acute, and there's always a thing that anger ratchets up very quickly with an executive function weakness. Um, Self control can be weaker as well. And there can also be an impact on a sort of knock on effect, really, on social skills. Um, and there's more likelihood of stress and anxiety. You can kind of see why when you look at the overall effect of executive function problems. And one other thing that gets affected that can have a knock-on effect for students is sleep. There can be difficulties switching off. Um, but some of the things I talk about can be strengths as well. So, for example, there can be an ability to hyper focus, and that can lead to academic excellence.
Mhm. That's interesting. So it's both an advantage and a disadvantage.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because I think with hyper focus, for example, it's when a student can go down a rabbit hole
Right.
when they're doing their homework, so they can actually go off tangent
Mm.
and not get the work done. But equally, I think at the point when people are specialising subjects more, that hyper focus can be really, really useful.
Um, that's really interesting, and I also understand because I recently read it, like I was reading a book about it myself. But I understand also they think executive function may possibly develop even for attention, which I
Do they?
hadn't realised. They think it's quite. They think the concept is they think you all the things you've listed. They think they lead and help lead into improving attention, which I hadn't realised. So you need a certain amount of frontal lobe activity to develop attention, so executive function from that, and I hadn't realised that.
And that yeah, because I came across executive function in the last decade rather than earlier in my career. And the reason I came across it at first was ADHD and that
Yeah.
impact, the attention deficit impact, which I think is a big part of it.
How do you distinguish the difference between executive function and attention and ADHD, really, or can you not?
Um, I think that attention is one of the cognitive abilities that's seated in the executive function part of the brain. So I think there's a really close relationship, but I'd say that attention is one aspect of executive function, but it's responsible for so many other processes too. And I guess they have knock-on effects on each other.
Hmm. Okay. Um, can a student have an executive order dysfunction without having a diagnosed learning difference?
Yes, I think so. And I think the thing is, though, I think SBLDs are definitely associated with impairments in executive function. Um, so an executive function difficulty could signal an SBLD. I haven't, as a rule, working in schools or university, come across people with a diagnosis of an executive function difficulty. But then my personal experience was that an NHS neuropsychologist diagnosed me with an executive function difficulty before I got diagnosed with ADHD, because the executive function difficulty was basically ADHD. I think it's really interesting that Russell Barkley defines ADHD as an executive function deficit disorder. And I think that that shows that the two are linked.
Definitely, and I think you're probably right. I think you can have. I mean, I certainly work in university myself. Think more and more young people today are finding it difficult to focus in lectures,
Yes.
which I think might be something to do with executive function.
Yeah, and I wonder increasingly how much attention spans are affected by phones and that way of reading and thinking and almost grasshoppering with your attention as well.
Definitely, it is noticeable. Um, could you sort of outline me, I suppose, how your webinar would hope to help parents, professionals, even students themselves, possibly not just understand executive function difficulties, but also some strategies to sort of, because you've identified the problem. So
Yeah.
what's the solution really? Or will your webinar cover? So is it, can we come to a solution? That's what I'm trying to ask you really.
I think my webinar will talk about executive function more than we've talked about it just now. It will focus on the impact on neurodiverse learners and different impacts for different SBLDs as well. And I'll cover my strategies will split into two parts because I'll talk about study skills.
Yeah.
and tactics for things like attention, organisation, memory. But then I'll also look at the self-regulation side of it too. So I'll have strategies for emotional turbulence and impulsivity, attentional bias, stress. So that I'm just trying to cover it from all angles really, so that we've looked at all the different tactics that can be used.
Brilliant, thank you. And will the sort of structure be similar to what is in chapter 10, isn't it, of your book? Will it be similar? So people will be able to follow it as well within the book as well as watch it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for your
Okay.
interview.
Thank you.
Much indeed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.